Hello hockey fans, and welcome back to another video. Like most sports, hockey has dealt with its fair share of social and political obstacles that have threatened its survival over the years. Whether it's having to find enough players during 2 world wars, trying to stay afloat financially during the Great Depression, or even the current situation we are facing today, over a century of existence is bound to bring plenty of challenges. The 1980s were no stranger to this either, as 2 of the world's most powerful nations were locked in a bitter Cold War and threatened the possibility of nuclear annihilation on a near daily basis. Isn't history great? Though much of the 80s saw cooler heads prevail on the ice, one incident saw the tensions of the time boil over, leading to a group of teenagers dropping the gloves and taking matters into their own hands. This is the story of the punch-up in Piestany, hockey's Cold War turned hot. In order to tell this historic tale, allow me to take you back to January 4th, 1987, during the International Ice Hockey Federation's World Junior Championships in Piestany, Czechoslovakia. The Soviet Union, who had won 17 of the last 20 World Championships and 7 of the last 10 World Junior Championships, were set to face Canada in both teams' final game of the round-robin tournament. The Canadians, who had only recently been sending a fully fledged national junior team to these events, instead of the Memorial Cup winners or an all-star team like they had in years prior, were not the biggest fans of the Soviets, going as far as to boycott both the World Championships and even the Olympics between the years 1970 and 1976 because of the Soviets' use of pro players that they keenly masked as amateurs. At this point in the tournament, Canada had posted a 4-1-1 record and had secured themselves a place on the medal podium, having guaranteed at least a bronze medal finish, whilst the Soviets were already out of medal contention with a 2-3-1 record, with rumours circulating that the Soviet team's officials were denying their players food after losses as a form of punishment, although that's never been proven. The IIHF had assigned Norwegian referee Hans Rønning to officiate this round-robin match. Rather than pick him for his experience of officiating at the international level, Rønning was selected primarily due to his neutrality towards the 2 nations. Upon hearing this news, Team Canada representative Dennis MacDonald attempted to convince the Federation to select a different, more experienced referee, citing a prior game that Rønning had officiated in the tournament between Canada and the US, which resulted in a brawl breaking out during the pre-game warm-ups, and the officials were not present to break it up. Despite his best efforts, the Federation refused MacDonald's request, and the match went on as planned. The build-up to the game was no different to any other match during the competition. The 2 teams took to the ice for their pre-game warm-ups, where a brawl didn't break out this time. The coaches took their positions behind their respective benches, and the match got underway. As the puck was dropped for the opening face-off, things unfortunately started as they would mean to go on, as Soviet forward Sergei Shesterikov immediately elbowed Canadian forward Dave McWayne, who then cross-checked the Soviet in retaliation, but neither player was given a penalty by Rønning. 5 minutes into the game, Canadian forward Theo Fleury scored the opening goal, and proceeded to celebrate by sliding across centre ice on his knees and using his stick as a machine gun to mimic shooting down the Soviet players sitting on the bench. As you might imagine, this made the Soviet players a little upset, and certainly didn't sit well with either the Soviet or the Canadian team representatives either. Despite the on-ice antics, and the number of slashes and other penalties going uncalled by Rønning, the first period ended up being a relatively controlled affair, with the Canadians taking a 3-1 lead at the buzzer. As the second period got underway, the game was briefly paused in order to conduct a moment of silence in memory of 4 players on the Swift Current Broncos who had been tragically killed when their team bus had crashed 5 days prior. This pause did help the tensions between the 2 sides settle down, but for like 5 minutes, before a minor scuffle saw a pair of players from both sides sent to the penalty box and the festivities continue. Approximately halfway through both the second period and the game, Canada held a 4-2 lead on the Soviet Union. With both teams continuing to shove and slash each other persistently, two players decided that enough was enough. The sky-high tensions had finally boiled over, and all hell broke loose. With 6:07 left to play in the second, Shesterikov collided with Canadian Everett Sanipas, and a fight broke out between the two. Soviet forward Pavel Kostitskin then hit Theo Fleury with a two-handed slash, and another fight broke out between those two. From there, the isolated incidents between the two pairs quickly escalated into a full-on line brawl, with each player on the ice picking an opponent to drop the gloves with. Things were made even worse when Soviet forward Evgeny Davidov became the first player to leave either bench in order to join the fight, an action which quickly prompted pretty much every other player from both benches to do the same. As each player grabbed a partner to dance the enforcer's dance, players on both sides of the battle implemented tactics that completely defied the unwritten rules of fighting in the sport, including throwing sucker punches, kicking their opponents, outnumbering an opposing player 2-on-1, and even headbutting. With Ronning and the two linesmen unable to control the situation, Czechoslovakian officials ordered the on-ice officiating crew to leave immediately. As the fighting continued uninterrupted, and with the commentators describing just how unprecedented an all-out brawl of this nature was at a tournament like this, the fans in attendance were becoming increasingly upset with what they were witnessing, causing those in the stands to boo loudly and chant "We want hockey" in their native tongue. Having seen quite enough, IIHF tournament officials ordered that all the lights in the arena be turned off in an attempt to leave the players swinging in the dark and bring the fighting to an end. Unfortunately for the officials though, this lack of vision didn't stop the combatants from completing their duels, throwing punches and wrestling to the ice with nothing more than the light emitting from the arena's scoreboard to help them see. Finally, fatigue started to set in and the brawl finally came to an end. The lights were switched back on and the two teams were told to leave the ice, head back to their dressing rooms and await further instruction. What neither team had realised though was that their actions in that game had caused quite a stir. Soon after the brawl was over, the IIHF announced that the rest of the game between the Canadians and the Soviets would not be played, and the result of the match would be declared null and void. The Federation then quickly set up an emergency meeting consisting of the Federation's president Gunther Sabetsky, as well as a single delegate from each of the tournament's participants, in order to figure out just how to handle this incident, as well as the ramifications for both parties moving forwards. The delegates then voted to eject both teams from the tournament by a count of 7-1, a decision that incensed Canadian delegate Dennis MacDonald, as three of the teams that voted to kick them out, Finland, Czechoslovakia and Sweden, all stood to gain a place on the medal podium, with Canada being taken out of contention. The Soviets were also banned from the tournament's closing banquet and the medal ceremony, yet the Canadians were still invited to the festivities. However, MacDonald refused the invitation on behalf of his team, so the Federation ordered the Canadian team to leave both the arena and the country within half an hour. The Canadians were then met by armed soldiers who escorted them across the border and out of Czechoslovakia shortly after. Following this emergency meeting, the Federation announced that they had voided the individual standings of both teams at the tournament, leading MacDonald to aptly state, "It's like we were never here." But the other teams in the tournament were able to keep the points they had gained in their matches against the two disqualified teams. It was also later identified that Hans Ronning's inexperience of officiating at the international level was a significant cause of the incident reaching the level it did, as several stick infractions had gone uncalled on both sides, which led to the two teams becoming increasingly frustrated and for tempers to boil over into an all-out brawl. In the days after the incident, both the Canadians and the Soviets tried to blame the other nation for the game getting out of hand. The Soviets claimed that a Canadian trainer had sparked the brawl by running over to the Soviet bench and punching one of their assistant coaches in the stomach, whilst the Canadians pointed out that Evgeny Davidov was the first player off either bench, which led to the emptying of both benches and all the players getting involved. Amongst all the accusations and finger-pointing, there were a number of conspiracy theories that emerged. Canadian hockey icon Don Cherry was one of the first to suggest that the Soviets might have instigated the brawl in an attempt to make sure Canada missed out on a medal just like they would. NHL Players Association Executive Director Alan Eagleson also went as far as to suggest that the Federation's decision would have been much different had it been the Soviets in medal contention and not the Canadians, citing a clear bias for the Soviets and the disdain that Federation President Sabetsky had for the Canadians. Though Eagleson wasn't exactly the best person to listen to, considering how he embezzled money from the NHL and defrauded some of its biggest stars for many years. But I digress. As the medals were awarded at the ceremony and the tournament came to a close, the Federation then voted to suspend all the players involved in the brawl from competing in international hockey events for 18 months, with all the coaches involved being suspended for 3 years. However, the players' suspensions were cut to just 6 months soon after, which allowed those players who were still eligible to participate in the 1988 tournament. Among the Canadians, only 2 players on the team were not suspended. Goaltender Jimmy Waite, who never threw a punch because he needed to stay healthy since Canada's backup netminder was already injured, and forward Pierre Turgeon, who refused to get off the bench and join the brawl until Canada head coach Bert Templeton told him to. So, after all the controversy both on and off the ice, after the punches, the disqualifications, and the suspensions, what was the lasting legacy of the punch-up in Piestany? Well, once both teams returned home, their native countries had vastly different reactions to the incident. The Canadian public mostly agreed with the players' actions that day, with opinion polls ranging between 87 to 92% in support of their actions, whilst the Soviets saw this brawl as an embarrassment, since their hockey program took pride in its team discipline. As a result, the head coach of the Soviet national junior team, Vladimir Vasilyev, was relieved of his duties. Vasilyev wouldn't be the only one to see his job take a hit though, as referee Hans Ronning would see his officiating career suffer greatly due to his poor decision-making that day. Ronning never officiated another international game, instead refereeing 2 more seasons in Norway before retiring from the job. Despite the possibility of history repeating itself the next year, the 1988 tournament saw a pair of calm and composed Canadian and Soviet teams take the gold and silver medals respectively. Not only that, but the 2 teams have gone on to dominate the competition in the years that have followed, with Canada winning 15 gold medals between 1988 and 2020, whilst the Soviet Union, now known as Russia, obviously, have won 6. This controversial event also created a huge increase in both the attention and the media coverage given to the World Junior Championships. For context, the Piestany tournament saw 1 Canadian reporter fly overseas to cover it. Just 1 year later at the 1988 tournament, every major Canadian media outlet had sent reporters to cover the tournament in Moscow. Fast forward to the last few tournaments, and you have a whole host of sports reporters from all over the hockey world sent to cover the games every year. But what about the players? What happened to them in the years that followed? Well, of the 20 Canadian players who took to the ice in the now infamous game, 19 of them went on to play in the National Hockey League, the only player who didn't being backup goaltender Sean Simpson, although he was drafted by the Washington Capitals. Whilst most of the players would go on to have decent, respectable careers, the likes of Brendan Shanahan, Pierre Turgeon and Theo Fleury would become mainstays or even superstars in the league for quite some time. Interestingly though, a handful of the Soviet team would also go on to play in the NHL too, including Alexander Mogilny, Sergei Fedorov, Vladimir Konstantinov and Vladimir Malakov, a concept that was considered outlandish at the time of the incident. Though it may be seen as a blemish on the sport's beautiful history, the punch-up in Piestany was the perfect microcosm of the social and political landscape of the time. 2 rival nations with vastly differing ideals and game plans that disliked each other so strongly and wanted to defeat the other so badly that with the help of some inexperienced referees were willing to throw the rules out of the window in order to assert their dominance in the hockey world. Even though this incident was still pretty unprecedented at the time, time has moved on so quickly that the thought of something like this happening today, over 32 years later, seems nigh impossible. I mean, could you imagine the response on Twitter if something like this happened in the year 2020? Sure, the Canadians may have missed out on their elusive gold medal, and the Soviets may have been reprimanded for their actions, but the outcomes of this historic event aren't all bad. After all, the World Junior Championships is now a vital, multi-million-dollar event in the hockey calendar, helping to raise the profile and awareness of the sport across the globe, whilst giving fans the chance to catch a glimpse of the sport's next superstars. It may have been riddled with controversy, both at the time and even still to this day. It may be considered one of the sport's darker days in its history, but boy was it one hell of a game to watch. And that's the story of the punch-up in Piestany. What do you guys think about this historic brawl? Was it good, bad, or do you miss the good old days when line brawls were a regular occurrence? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what you guys think. But thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, or watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. A big thank you to Antti Hannanen, Chris Gadsby, Connor B, Paul Malia, Jordan Whitehead, and Martin Tolness, as well as a huge thank you to Max Artis for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.